business, and you ask, what's the objective now that the bond's already passed? Well, the key point is the bond set a capacity of what they're able to spend, but it doesn't mean they have to spend it all. So the key point is to make sure that they just spend what's necessary, what's needed once they build this, not above and beyond that. So I think that is, to your question, is a good point. Stacy asked me to talk about social studies. We're in the middle of the social studies review, so I'm going to try to do that without putting you to sleep. And I've got, I think, a few other topics that are important right now, so we're going to go over those also. But as she said, my name's Keven Ellis. I'm a chiropractor from Lufkin. I served on the Lufkin School Board now. I'm on my second year on the State Board of Education. I always kind of apologize a little bit that I'm not able to get out here as much as I would like to. For a couple of reasons. Number one, I have 30 other counties besides Upshur County. I have 31 counties. If you think of it, there's 15 state board members, there are 31 senators. So we essentially have a double Senate district. My district runs from Lufkin all the way to Texarkana, across to Sherman, Denison, and back down, including Tyler, Longview, Marshall, and everywhere in between. So I try to get out here as much as I can, but I do appreciate Stacy. She's become a trusted friend, someone that I can communicate with. Will always pick up the phone when I call. I send her my agenda oftentimes before meetings that she'll review. She'll stick Desiree on it, I think, a lot of times. And when you really got to get down to the meat of the matter, I was passing through one time not too long ago, just had coffee with you, and it's very nice to have that communication and so forth with that. But now we're going over a social studies revision. So go ahead. Do I have a clicker? You have it. Go ahead and go forward. You go forward one. So this is what we typically do on the State Board of Education. There's a variety of other things, but these are our big three pillars: permanent school fund, curriculum standards, instruction materials. The next one. And so what I want to highlight today is the curriculum standards. So what a curriculum standard is, it's the skeleton or the bare bones of what every child in Texas should learn in every single subject, in every single grade. And the idea is that if a third grader in El Paso moves to Lufkin, he's going to be learning the same thing he did in El Paso and Lufkin. It's kind of a standardized curriculum standard, just the skeleton. Now, local districts have the ability to put their curriculum ideas on top of that. We do the what, and local districts do the how and the when. So that's the difference between the standard and the curriculum with that. So the reason that this is important, go ahead and go back one. Okay. So to step back a little bit, when I got on the board, we were finishing up a big English language arts revision. We did that. We do each subject about once a year. We also do the science streamline. Let me tell you this, the science, there's a couple of these, they're all important, and there's some that's very important. Think about whenever you have science, what are you going to have? You're going to have biology. Whenever you have biology, what's the main topic going to be? We're going to be talking about evolution versus the creation debate, and that was front and center. And I want to say that I was very proud. State Board of Education doesn't always vote together on party lines. We have 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And oftentimes, if we're discussing how we're going to teach a comma or a quotation mark or a exclamation point, we may differ on that. I'm kind of being a little bit facetious. But when it comes down to real things, important things, like on the science standards, we were 10 to 5, straight down party lines every time. And I was proud to get a phone call after we did the science streamline from Don McElroy, who's a former State Board of Education chair who worked very hard on that, thanking us for keeping those science revisions strong. But now we're going through social studies, and I was warned that if you thought science was hard, social studies is really going to be a bear with that. So, what do you hear a lot about schools? You hear concerns about testing, right? We're teaching to the test. Teachers have too much time they have to do on test prep and not enough time really teaching. Well, I can't change testing. There's an assessment division within the agency that does that, but there is a part of this that we have control over, and that's the amount of items, the amount of things that every student has to learn in every grade. And there's not one person who's involved in education that pretty much won't tell you that our curriculum standards are bloated. And what they mean by that is there's just too much crammed in there. They say a mile wide and an inch deep. And I don't know how well you can read this, and it's a whole lot of numbers, but let me just kind of point out on the far left side is English language arts. And it's the number of actual items, what we call student expectations that a child has to learn. And so on the left side, it's in the 60s and 50s from kindergarten to English, and it shows how we decreased them from there. That's a little bit better. The math is in the 50s and 40s, and these are the number of items they have to learn in a given year. Science, we did the streamlined in 40s to 30s and so forth. Reasonable amount. Social studies is now our chief offender of too much. So look at all those numbers. We have now 110, 130, 123. There's just too much information. What that leads to is that a teacher knows that it's going to be tested at the end of the year, so they have to fly through everything to get it all in. If little Johnny misses something, there's no time to go back and help Johnny get there. So what we can do to help with the testing situation is to streamline social studies, and that's what we're working on right now. Think of streamlining and a full revision is the difference of, if we're doing a full revision, you're starting from scratch, you have writing utensils, and you're starting a new set of standards. In a revision, which is what we're doing now, in a streamline, it's doing the same thing, but you're only giving a pair of scissors, and your pencil or pen, your writing utensil is taken away. We are not adding anything to the standards, we're only cutting away. And so that's what we're focused on right now. Go to the next slide there. You won't be able to read this, but this is just a graphic representation of something that we changed on the State Board of Education. We actually, as the 15 members, don't write the standards. We have educators who come in and help us with this. In the past, we did English language arts, and it was different. One group started and finished the whole process. And it can be a situation where one group kind of has a little too much control over it, and they can drive the process. So what we have now is what's called an evergreen process. And the point of this slide is it kind of loops around. So what we're doing is we're giving the first task to one work group. And they start with that, and they do 2 meetings. And then on the 3rd meeting, half of those people go away. And you bring in a new group of people. And they go 2 meetings. And so it's kind of a continual process, what we call an evergreen. So we're allowed them to get more set of eyes on this, more set of educators in there. So this is going to, I think, be a very useful process to get through what we've got coming up. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, as a very knowledgeable group here, I do need your input on this. This is something that I can't do alone. We've got good people looking on this, but I want all of y'all to either take a picture of this or maybe Stacey, I can get the information to Stacey and she can pass it out. This is where the social studies information is. And I'll leave it up there for just a second. I can send that to you. But if you go to the Texas Education Agency website, you can do that by either Googling Texas Education Agency, or you can Google the State Board of Education. Yeah, you've already got it. But go to the next slide right there. Go to one more. When you go there, this is the main page. You're going to click on that little purple square right there that says academics. And then right there, it's going to be the TEACS, essential knowledge. Go ahead to the next one. You will go to the social studies TEACS streamline and one more. And you'll go to the work group crafts and one more. We'll get you to where the work groups are now. So like I said, we've got different groups that are working through the process with this. But it's just about crunch time. We started this social studies revision at the end of 2017 with all these work groups starting to work. And they've worked throughout the entire part of 2018. In our June meeting, we had our first discussion among the board, and we had a lot of changes that I'll talk about in just a second. Coming up next meeting, which is our September meeting, we're going to have what we call our first reading. We always have a discussion meeting, and a first reading, and a second reading, and final passage. So the first reading is where we want to make all the true changes at, because the second reading is the final time. You don't want to be making substantial changes right before you make something final. So the September meeting is going to be very crucial for that. I talk about how we perform a lot of tasks on the State Board of Education, but this is why you elected me. And this is important stuff, and that's why I really want to focus on that information right there. You can go to the next slide. Yes, sir.
One question. You said that when you made the statement that we are not adding anything to the standard, we're only cutting away. Are you talking about just in social studies or on every topic?
So right now I'm talking about just in social studies.
Okay.
So typically there's about 10 topics that we do. We do about 1 a year. So about every 10 years we do a full revision, and it's got a schedule that we go through. The legislature came in because of this issue I talked about and said we need to streamline it. It was actually passed by the House, passed by the Senate. The governor vetoed it, actually. And the reason being was he was afraid that there was going to be when you open up for changes, you completely open the door. And the idea is that we're gonna let some of the critters out, but sometimes critters can come in. I think that's why he vetoed it. He was a little worried about opening the door up. Yet, we took it to heart, and we're really focused on the streamline right now. So what we're doing, in between the full revisions of the other subject, this is a streamline. So in this subject, streamline only, like for example, we just did ELAR, and that was a full revision. So this case, just social studies. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. So the first group, work group A, got our material, and they came up with big picture, big ideas. The second group came in, and they actually did a rubric. They took every single historical figure that's mentioned throughout our material, and they graded it on how relevant it was on a scale of 0 to 20. The third work group came along and looked at kind of the history strands and the geography strands, and this is a good time to bring this up. Social studies, like a lot of the other subjects, is in different kind of strands or pillars that we work on, and these are those right there. You have a history strand, a geography, and I won't read through them all, but you can see the ones that we did. So each one kind of focused on a little bit of these right here. Now, to go through, I've actually got some papers over there that if anyone wants to spend some time talking, I'll go through some of the specific details. But to go through too much, we literally have 13 years, K through 12, of material. So I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but I want you to know that we're keeping our eyes on this. Does anyone know Barbara Cargill? Does that name ring a bell? She actually used to represent y'all from this district. She's from Conroe. The districts where they redistricted, her district ran all the way up there. I spent a couple hours on the phone with her this weekend, making sure that we have all the right pieces in place for our next discussion item coming up. We've got some other good conservatives on the board, Ken Mercer, David Bradley, Tyson Miller, Donovan Hortz, that are also doing this. In our September meeting, I'm also pretty excited too. We've got David Barton coming to testify, and he's going to help us with this process also. So what I wanted to go through is a little bit of the details of what's happening. Again, we could spend hours, if not days, if weeks doing this. So what I'm going to talk are just a little bit of the highlights. There's more of this if you want to talk with me later. But these are some of the things that have changed along the way. An example is we have in first grade and second grade, but we lost in third grade a specific phrase. And that phrase is that we want to have students identify characteristics of good citizenship, including truthfulness, justice, equality, respect for oneself and others, responsibility in daily life, and participation in government by educating oneself about the issues, respectfully holding public officials to their word, and voting. So those are types of good standards that we need and we have in there. So it's in first and second grade, but they've currently taken out the third, so that's one that we're working on. During our previous meeting, they had actually taken out a few of the things like discussion about Labor Day, discussion about the White House, and discussion about Mount Rushmore. We had discussions with that, and they put it back in for the current draft. Constitution Day was taken out. He's our friend that's always asking me about Constitution Day. He's usually videoing. What's his name? I'm drawing a blank on it. You know what I'm talking about? Still, yes. I was ready. I was ready for James to be here. He was going to ask me about that. And I was going to be proud to say that the work groups took it out, but we made sure that Constitution was added back into both kindergarten and first grade. Another example is they had a discussion about what a good citizen is in kindergarten, and they took it out, and so they give us rational reasons or ideas of why they took it out. And they don't talk about what citizenship is until first grade. So they said you can't really talk about being a good citizen in kindergarten until you learn about what it is in first grade. So those are some of the other issues that we're looking at. We currently lost the discussion about the Articles of the Confederation in fifth grade, as it's covered in eighth grade. So that's another one that we're going to continue to work on. Founding Fathers was taken out of part of fifth grade, but it was moved into another area. Federalist Papers was taken out of our last draft, but we had it put back in the most current draft. And so those are some of the ones that we really fought for, but there's some real victories that I want to talk about. Number one, in U.S. history, they had taken out E pluribus unum and in God we trust, and we got that put back in U.S. history. And I think one of the most critical ones that we have is when we talk about American exceptionalism and what makes America great. And the work groups took that out. And we worked last time, and on the current draft, we had that reinstated back into U.S. history, so we're real proud of that one. And I would say kind of the icing on the cake was in U.S. history. We got Billy Graham put back in, and we got Hillary Clinton taken out. So we're happy with that one. So there's some other things, some other details that we can go over, but let me tell you, I'm cautiously optimistic of where we're at. We could have been in a lot worse place of the starting point. So again, the September meeting is when we're really going to start getting into the details. But I think from a starting point there, we're in a good place, but we're still going to fight for this next meeting to make it even better. And again, have people like David Barton and the conservatives on this board working together. I think you're going to be happy with what ends up. Some other things that are written down, the 10 Commandments, we were able to keep in there. And then another important one, I said, American exceptionalism was one of the most important. We discussed the Founding Fathers and religious freedom, and also discussed the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, which we kept, but they took out the part to compare that to the phrase separation of church and state, which we know is not in there. We want them to be able to understand that that's not actually identified in there. So we're trying to get that put back in, that they can compare and contrast the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause with separation of church and state. That's not there. So those are a few of the highlights that's coming up in social studies. So again, Stacy will get you that website information. Take a look at it. It's a lot of information, but I know a group like this can help us out with that. The other key point is we're standing strong. We got the right people in place to really make sure we finish this off in social studies. So I've got a few other things that I want to talk about, but before we go there, is there any questions on social studies? While I'm taking the questions, go to that paper. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question is, exactly what you're explaining to us. I'm getting that these are standards for the teacher to teach, but this is not necessarily in a book, or are they teaching from online? How are they doing it now?
Okay. Great question. So the first thing we do is to approve the teach, everything I just explained right there. The next step that I didn't talk about, because it was one of those other things that we do, is to approve instructional material. So we finish with approving the teach. We do what's called a proclamation. A proclamation is we tell the publishers, we proclaim to the publishers that we want instruction material for this new set of material to be done. Now, we're not doing this here, and here's why. This is just a in-between revision. Textbooks, if you buy one book for every kid in the state, you're going to spend about $1 billion. So in between, we're not doing new material. That's why we're only cutting away. If you add to it, now you have to add new books. So that's a good key reason that we're only taking away. If we take away, the book still is going to have everything that was in there, no new material, so we can keep the same books. So in a normal cycle, when it's a full revision, we proclaim to send us some material, then we can approve the new instruction material, and it goes down from there.
And how often are new books brought on the market?
So for each, like I said, each subject, whether it's math or social studies or English or science, is revised by us about once every 10 years. So they essentially get new instruction material about once every 10 years. So a big change with that. It used to be all paper. One of the most common questions I get is the question about how powerful Texas is in the instruction material or the textbook market. You've probably heard the phrase, as goes Texas, so goes the nation. And what that means is our buying power was so large that the publishers write a book for Texas and then sell it to everybody else, because they didn't want to write a new book for Idaho or for Iowa. That's changed a little bit for two reasons. Number one is digital print. In the old days, they literally laid the book out on a print press. And if you want to change one paragraph, you have to change the whole book. Well, now with digital, it's right click delete, and it's a little bit easier. The other reason that's changed is Common Core. There's 44-ish states that do Common Core now. We are still the big dog, us in Florida and California, but the buying power of those other states at least come up equal to what Texas is. So that's taken away a little bit of our so goes Texas, so goes the nation with that. But make no doubt that they still pay very close attention.
It seems like we would all go digital, because every little kid has it.
Well, here's yes, and here's the issue. So we used to call it the textbook fund. Now it's instruction material because of that. Actually, probably 50 to 60%, maybe closer to 70 of instruction material now purchased is digital. So the whole world thought, well, we're going to go to digital and save all this money. because they're not gonna print it. Guess what publishers did?
Yeah, they just raise the
They
price.
sold paper textbooks for $80 and a digital copy for $78. And now you have to have one, now you have to have continued subscriptions. We had that hope that digital was gonna save the state a lot of money, it didn't. There's another new hope, and it's called Open Education Resources. And what that is that if you have a subject like chemistry, for example, Rice University is doing this. Rice is writing a textbook from a perspective of their professors. And they're publishing it, the state's paying them a little bit. I think they have about $10 million in their budget to do this now. Compared to that sounds, $10 million is a lot of money, but we're talking compared to $1 billion, is a whole lot less. So they pay Rice $10 million, write a textbook, and it's free to every district who wants to use. And it's aligned to our curriculum standards. We'll see. We were all optimistic about digital. Maybe, hopefully this won't turn out the same way, but we're pretty optimistic that that's gonna be able to save the state a lot of money on the textbooks. Yes, sir.
Yeah, why don't you tell about the permanent school fund and how much money goes to the schools from that?
That's one of my favorite things to talk about because I'm most proud of it. There's a lot of educational trust in the United States. Texas has the largest, called the Permanent School Fund, currently sits around $44 billion. We started in 1854 with a $2 million investment. And that actually falls, the State Board of Education has a lot of duties that we do. We have one constitutional duty, and every other one we do is one that's granted to us by the legislature. They can add these and take these away, but we have one constitutional duty, and that's to manage the permanent school fund. So what we do, and we're about to do at this next meeting, every biennium, we set a percentage rate of distribution, a percentage that we're gonna pull off and help fund public education. Now, I'm gonna get a little bit in depth with that. We have a term that we use to do that called intergenerational equity. And what that means is, when we set up a rate that we're gonna pull off of that fund to help pay for education, if we pull off too low of a rate, we're not benefiting today's kids as much as we will tomorrow. If we set too high of a rate, then we're benefiting today's kids more than we are tomorrow's kids. So the idea is to set a rate. We have experts who help us do this, that today's kids are gonna get as much value out of the permanent school fund as tomorrow's kids will be. And we look 20 and 30 years down the road, we try to make that line equal. So again, if we go too high, it gets skewed this way. If we go too low, it gets skewed that way. So this last term, permanent school funds spend about $2.6 billion to help fund education in Texas. Half of that goes to pay for the textbooks in Texas. So no school actually pays for their textbooks that all their students use. It comes out of this fund. That's what half of what we spent goes to. The other half goes to what's called the available school fund. It's simply a per capita distribution. They take the amount of money that we pull off, divide it by the number of kids in Texas. It comes out to just over $200 a kid, and every district gets that to help just fund their general education. So that's what the permanent school does.
And there's another state in the union that has that.
I don't know if there's none that have it. There's none that comes even close to what our value is with that. Harvard used to be the largest educational trust in the country. We recently passed them up. So, yeah, it's something to be very proud of. And let me tell you, the conservatives on the board, we're losing David Bradley. I don't know if anyone knows David Bradley from Beaumont. He's rolled off the board after 20-something years of service, and he's been a real key figure in making sure that we're very, very conservative with management of that permanent school. So the rest of us that are still there will make sure we continue that. Come on. Any other questions? Okay. One more topic that I want to talk about, and the only reason I want to bring this up is because unless you're going to live under a rock for the next week, you're going to be hearing about this. This is the A through F accountability rating that has been about 2 or 3 years in process of getting ready. It's going to come out on Wednesday, day after tomorrow. So I think you're going to see a lot of this in the news media coming up. So I want to talk just a little bit about it and what it is. And Stacy, you've got those numbers.
Sure.
So I'm going to have you just kind of got about a 50-page document. I'm going to go through in about 5 minutes real quick. So go ahead and go to the next one.
Question it. Okay, let's just do that.
Okay, so before we had all kinds of different terms that we rated our school, whether it was exemplary or met standard or improvement required or acceptable, and it really was kind of confusing. Even I that was involved in education would have to go back and look at it. What do these ratings really mean? We know what A through F is. A is good, F is bad, and it's real straightforward right there that you see there. And the next one on my list, go ahead, what number slide, yeah.
Oh, wait, now we're back on way.
So, one key important point, districts will get an A through F grade this year, which will be the first time. Campuses will not. Campuses will get their A through F letter grade next year. So this year you're only going to see it in districts, next year you'll see it in campuses. Go ahead to the next one that we've got. So the way they passed this 2 sessions ago, in the 2 sessions ago. And it had 4 different domains. They came up with a plan, they ran the numbers, and it was a little bit of a mess. We had schools that we knew were doing very well in educating kids, getting D's and F's. We had schools that we really knew were not doing a good job educating kids, getting A's and B's. So they really had to go back. Last session, they tweaked the methodology, and they've come up with these 3 building blocks of what the grade's gonna be built off of. Number 1 is gonna be off student achievement. Number 2, school progress, and 3, closing the gaps. Now, as you see that green bar goes over 2 of those, and that's important because the district's gonna be able to get the best of those 2 ratings. School achievement is just a raw number of how your kids did. Now, we know what poverty does. It's much harder to educate children in a high poverty area than it is, say, in Highland Park. So if you went off of just student achievement, kids in Highland Park are gonna get A's, and we've got areas in high poverty here in East Texas that are gonna struggle with that. So what they did is they did school progress, which it doesn't matter where your kid's at, as long as he's moving forward in the right direction. If A's up here and one of your kids here, but in a year, you've added a year or more of growth to that kid, that's good. We haven't got them up to where we need to be, but we've got them moving in the right direction, and that's what school progress is. So every district will get to choose, do they do better in achievement, raw scores, or in growth, and they get the best of. And then the last one is closing the gaps. So I won't go through all those because it gets pretty much in detail there. But that's the key point that you're gonna see. They put all of those grades together, they put a number, they're gonna get a grade in each one of those, and then one summative grade. So every district will have one grade. They were a little bit afraid of not putting one summative grade, because let's say we had a D, a B, and a D, that school had a lot to work on, but guess what would go up on the reader boards in all the schools? We got a B, and they were somewhat truthful, but they didn't bring out the whole story. So now we made it where there's gonna be one grade, and that's what it's gonna be. So there was a lot of people who were not on board with this, that were not happy with this, but it's here. Most districts have said, okay, we're gonna work with this, we're gonna move forward with this, but you're gonna hear about this a lot in the news on Wednesday, because this is gonna come out for the very first time, so something to pay attention to that. From the state perspective, there were a couple key points that we wanted to make sure was put forward. Number 1, it's not a ranking system. The grades are not designed where we're gonna have the top school and the bottom school, and they're all ranked in order. It's just simply what you need to do to achieve those grades and what grades you get. So in theory, every school in the state of Texas could get an A. And also in theory, every school in the state of Texas could get an F. We're not ranking school versus school, it's just what your grade is and where you fall in that. The other key point that we had is that, and I saw this a lot when I was at Lufkin, we hired a new superintendent. When you get a bunch of applications to hire a superintendent, the first thing that I did is I went back to their former schools that these superintendents were from. How are they doing? You know, are they doing well? How are their schools' grades? How are they doing? And you go back and you look, and they're kind of evaluated, school districts are evaluated one way for a year or two, and then you go back and they changed it, and you go back a little farther and they changed it, and it's every time the legislature met, they changed the way that it was graded. So if I had a superintendent in a district for 5 years, I had no idea how they were doing over that 5 years, because it changed every other year. So they've put a commitment to have this in place for at least 5 years. Reevaluate it then, but I think that's gonna be helpful to watch and judge how schools do over time, to keep that in place for 5 years. So again, one more thing to watch out for this week, because that's gonna come up here shortly. Yes, sir.
So, what's the time period for dysfunction?
I'm sorry?
What's the time period for dysfunction? How many years before the state says, okay, we got you now?
There was a new bill, and it was also last session, maybe 2 again, that changed it. There was a very key phrase that was changed. It was after previous, after 5 years, the commissioner could do a couple things. And now it says after 5 years, the commissioner must do a couple things. So you had districts that could go along, if they told their sob story, the commissioner could have a soft heart and let them keep going. He no longer has that option. And the number to your answer is 5. After 5 years of being a failing school, there's a couple of situations that has to take place. They can close the district. In fact, I had I'm drawing a blank here. Up by Mount Pleasant, there was a small K-8 district that just closed this year. Just a little bit west of Mount Pleasant. Winfield, yes. So it had that scenario. It was after 5 years, and there is no more Winfield. As of this year, they're merged in with Mount Pleasant. Again, it was a small K-8 district. So that's one option. The commissioner can close the school. He can put in a board of managers. That's happened in Beaumont and El Paso, where they comes in, the entire school board is excused, and the new school board is appointed by the commissioner. That's happened a couple of times with that. Or they also have the option to merge or join with a charter school, and that's another scenario that they can do.
There's no more TEA monitor like there used to be for kids.
All that happens in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 before they get there. There's a lot of intervention that happens before that 5th year. Even after 1 year, all those things wheels start turning, to turn it around.
There was one thing that needs me to keep talking about that I wanna make sure I understand. When you talk about closing the gap, I think students achieve made it pretty easy to understand, school progress. But can you somewhat briefly summarize what closing the gap?
Forward to maybe slide, it's one of those later ones, look at 15, 20. I think it's actually 29 or 30.
Don't look.
See all you're missing? Okay, one more. So here's, we're talking about closing this gap. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're comparing about, we hear about gaps in education, what different groups of kids are doing in one district compared to the other. This is what the state looks at. They look at race and ethnicity, and I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna come back to that because I've got some issues with that. They look at how your special education kids are doing, how you're continuously enrolled versus mobile. Mobile kids are a big challenge. There's a lot of kids, especially in the urban areas, that move continually. Mom or dad is chasing a rent deal, and they're just moving from school to school. Those are tough kids to educate, so they're kind of grouped differently. So that's another area that we look at. We look at English language learners, and we look at economically disadvantaged. To me, I would rather get rid of that far left one. I don't think how a kid learns and how we teach a kid has anything to do with what color their skin is. I think it has everything to do with the one on this side, which is their economic disadvantage. Children of poverty that is the #1 area of challenging kids to educate. Now, a majority of African American, majority of Hispanics they happen to be economically disadvantaged. It's just demographics. It is what it is. So African American kids score lower. Again, I don't think it has anything to do with what color their skin is. It has everything to do with this. So in my mind, I take
the gaps between these various groups. Is that what?
I'm sorry?
Closing the gaps, I'm still not.
Okay, so we're gonna look at let's take economically disadvantaged.
Okay.
So we're gonna look at Gilmer's just only the economically disadvantaged kids. And we're gonna look at what the region average is for economically disadvantaged kids. And let's say Gilmer's economically disadvantaged kids are here, and a region or state average is up here. So I'm picking on Gilmer just because I'm here. But let's say there's a difference there. There's a gap between what one school district is and where the rest of the kids or the state is. If Gilmer can bring those kids up closer to the state average, that's closing the gap. Does that make sense?
So you're trying to get closer to the, if you're below the state average in these categories, you're trying to get closer to that.
Yes.
Okay, that explains it.
And I've got issues with this one too. I don't think you should use someone else as a bar. I think you should have just a set score is where it should be. When you're trying to close the gap, sometimes you're gonna play some favorites with different ones. You're gonna look at your challenging kids. And let's go back to my race and ethnic one. If I've got a second grade class and you've got 25 kids, and there's 5 of them that are doing poorly. And 4 are brown, let's say, and 1's white. are we gonna focus on just the 4 brown ones? Because I can close my race and ethnicity gap for doing that. Are you gonna work on all 5 of those kids? I'm gonna say you're gonna work on all 5 of those. So I'm a little bit, I don't like necessarily the closing the gaps, in concept, but it's here and that's part of what we're using. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the economic disadvantage thing kind of bothers me also, because the kids know that. I've talked to the teachers and I said, do they know that? They said, yes. Well, if you tell a kid that he's somehow in this category down here, then how's the kid gonna perform? But aren't you like a slow runner then all of a sudden? If someone says, well, you're a slow runner, right? Then you're gonna be a slow runner.
Built in my head.
Right. Someone says you're economically disadvantaged, you're gonna underperform. So you kind of label it.
So I would say there's no reason for that child to know. I'm not saying that a district or a principal or a counselor or a teacher doesn't somehow let that kid know, but there's no reason in the accountability system. They are, when we do the data system, they're coded a certain way, but they shouldn't have to know that. Now, to your bigger point of, how do those kids learn? All kids can learn, and we hear that a lot. But let me show you what's happening in proof in the pudding is what Dallas is doing. Dallas is a struggling area, no doubt. They've got a high challenge in their student demographics. They are literally killing it right now. Dallas is doing incredible work. They have over 40 campuses that were failing, that were an improvement required in the old system. They've really revamped their system. They are down to 3, from 40-something down to 3. Now, an opposite scenario is Houston. Houston is killing it the other way. They're getting killed. Houston is doing horrible right now. Their board's in a mess, and they're going the wrong way. And so Dallas is actually becoming a real shining example. What they've done is they've got a program to identify their best teachers. They said, okay, they've got thousands. They have thousands and thousands of teachers. They got a program to identify their best, and they're taking them to their most challenging campuses. They're putting their best teachers in front of their most struggling student population, and you're seeing those types of changes in there. So those are different examples of what they're looking at. Any other questions? Again, I want to thank you. Like I said, it's a big area. It's a lot of places to get around, but I want to thank groups like this that really, I know they're out there. I know they're supporting us. I know that when I need them, they're there for me, that Stacy will pick up that phone and talk with me. Again, going back to social studies, what I brought up, I really want you to take a look at that if you've got the interest. I left my card on everyone's table. If you lose it, you can't find it, Stacy has my direct number. You may give anyone my direct cell phone number, and I will pick up the phone and talk to them as I want to hear. One more question. Yes, sir.
How much money is spent at the school district compared to other campuses?
I'm talking administration. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying how much money is spent at the school district versus on the campus?
So when the state gives money to, it gives it straight to the district. It doesn't delineate that it's going to go to a certain campus.
Right.
So Gilmore ISD gets X number of dollars, whatever they get. It's up to the local school board to say that X number or X percentage is going to go to this high school, X is going to go to the middle school, X is going to go to the elementary school. So that's a local decision, and I don't know what the breakdown is there. The question I hear a lot of time, if you're getting at it, is how much is spent on administration and central admin, and that's somewhere between 3 and 4% that is typically spent on central admin and not in the campuses. But how much is spent on each campus is just a local decision. That kind of goes back to what Houston's going on in Houston. Houston has a program where they just simply give every school a pot of money, and that school leader gets to decide how that money's spent. And that's kind of problem the issues are having, is that money's not being spent well at that local level versus some of the other ones where central admin is kind of deciding how it gets spent. Any other questions? Okay, well again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Keven, Dr. Ellis. Seriously, if anyone has any desire whatsoever to help out in the school social studies curriculum, help Dr. Ellis and Desiree, cause he's right, I did kinda get it off to Desiree, cause there's a million subjects that seem to be working on at the same time. But David Barton is with Wall Builders. David Barton's usually in this spot. It happens, about every 10 years? And, so that he really does need the help. We appreciate him, and definitely, some of y'all know about the Common Core and the Seascope Days with Thomas Radcliffe. You're a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it, seriously. He's a very great guy to work with. Seriously, if you have any questions for him, we have that, like I said, with the cards on the table, or if you need a phone number, I can shoot it to you. He does answer his phone. It's very helpful. To go real quick, because I know we went over, and I'm so sorry about that, I really am. Please get with Sheriff Webb for the applications for the Citizens Academy, before you leave. Also, to let y'all know about Chris Ann Hall, we may be having her out again at the end of this year for us, but she's also going to be working with the homeschoolers and possibly one another school, ISD, out here to come out and speak to our kids and give them some history, which is a positive thing, right? I think last year she met with the law enforcement, and this year we're trying to get her in with the schools. So if you have any suggestions on some schools or some help with homeschooling, if you could connect with Darlene, and at ISDs, if you could connect with John, her husband, in the back of the room. Okay, we also too are looking really quick. We're looking for volunteers for Senator Cruz. We're looking for volunteers for the educational and social studies. And we're looking for volunteers if you are interested in attending city council meetings. Please talk to one of us that has the ET4L badge on. We can really use some help on that. And again, just to remind you, next month is September 10th. Here was Powerhouse Joanne Hall. Thank you very much and have a blessed evening.